Clive Barker came into this world on October 5th, 1952, as the first child to Leonard and Joan Baker in Liverpool, England. 3.5 years later, on February 24th, 1956, his brother Roy Barker was born. Now, Liverpool in 1952 was something very different than it is today. 7 years after the end of World War II, the city was still scrambling to pick up the pieces, making it a rather desolate and sad place. The city suffered severely from the bombs that rained down on it. Consequently, quite a few of those sites still existed. Now, in many ways, it was a scary place, a violent city, a city where, to put it mildly, racial tensions were evident, a city where poverty was manifest. Now, Clive's birth had its share of complications, ending with a cesarean. Now, Joan didn't come home with her son until 14 days after the birth. Now, in 1950s England, cesarean births were arduous procedures for mothers, and despite her perfect health, her recovery was slow. Now, later in life, Clive partially attributed his fascination with and terror of the sight of blood to the complicated circumstances surrounding his birth. Of this, he said, "I was a cesarean birth, and mother and I nearly died, and I was stuck upside down for a long time. And there was a series of traumatic first impressions of the world, which I believe have become a leitmotif of terror for me. A lot of noise, panicked voices, even if they have nothing to do with me. I think the first few minutes of my life were just horrible, and worse for Mom, in that she was unable to hold me. And then when we both did survive, there was this fierceness, an absolute sort of, 'I'm never going to let you go' on both sides, still expressed. And the sight of blood makes my body change. I break into a cold sweat. I shake, not all the time, but under the weirdest circumstances. There have been PG-13 movies in which something, a gunshot would, or a certain rhythm of the shot just shock me, make me shake. And then, of course, there are elaborate grand guignol things where I don't give a flying fuck. I thoroughly enjoy them. Now, there's something primal there, and the only thing I can figure out is that it's because of these terrible circumstances of the very, very beginning of my life." He spent the first 14 years of his life in the suburbs of Penny Lane. Then in 1966, just as the Beatles were becoming a worldwide phenomenon, the family moved to Oakdale Road. Oakdale Road was a classic British working-class neighborhood, which seemed to be a gray contrast to the blue skies of Penny Lane. Now, many of Clive's memories of the place were of textures and vague impressions. He'd remember seeing an eclipse from his backyard. He would later recall burning summers and the ominous feelings they would manifest. Now, he referred to summers in a lot of his writing, exploring that foreboding feeling that he felt connected with summers. Now, given that writing is often a form of escapism or a way to exorcise demons, the question of what he was trying to escape from or exorcise has often come up. Or for Clive and his parents, who also received the question, it was difficult to answer, since according to the three of them, his childhood was nothing short of unexceptional. But that was part of its pleasure, Clive noted. That goes to show that, unlike many writers, he was not trying to exorcise emotions nor demons from the past, but was evolving into a creative creature in his own right. Now, despite his own theories about the consequences following his difficult birth, he was not interested in explaining the pull towards the macabre and horrific through conventional psychology. In his own words, "Because it seems to me that, although they may not always be spurious, they're always going to be reductionist. Motives are more complicated than one could ever express. So all you end up doing is telling part of the truth. If you say, well, I had a terrible experience when my dog was run over, and I started writing horror fiction because of it, that's never going to be the whole truth. I don't like the notion of hanging motive upon certain key events, as though the mind isn't, as I perceive it to be, a fluid, infinite series of associations." Now, he pondered the idea of whether there are ground rules about the way minds are created. If maybe some minds come wired differently. In particular, this is interesting as he himself admits that his taste wasn't shaped by any traumatic event in childhood, or any good event for that matter. He remembered strange things from childhood, of course, but nothing that left a longer impression in that sense. He was creative and imaginative, however. His imagination had a considerable range from very fanciful light material to rather dark material. Clive had a reputation for being a dreamer. He was known to have imaginary friends. He had a fondness for monsters, a fondness of drawing monsters. But then again, many kids like monsters, and many do like to draw them. A very precocious and very imaginative child, he was his mother's pride and joy. According to his mother, his ability to speak was perfect by age 2. Perhaps this can be linked to the fact that neither of his parents simplified adult language when speaking to him. Even as an infant, most of the adults in his life spoke to him as if he was an adult. Now, perhaps it was that his mother made up stories to tell him on a nightly basis. He adored his mother's riverbank tales. However, his first and true love was the story of Peter Pan. He later said that Peter Pan was the book he wanted to be buried with. He was so captivated by the story that around the age of 6 or 7, he imagined himself as one of the Lost Boys, longing to fly away from Liverpool into Never Never Land. Now, he never considered his childhood life especially eventful or out of the ordinary. His younger brother Roy, however, even at an early age, felt that Clive was somewhat different. By this, he quite likely was referring to the fact that his older brother didn't play very much with other kids. Truth be told, he appeared to be much more comfortable all by himself. He would spend hours alone, reading, drawing, or just simply thinking, wondering whether Never Never Land might truly be a place, and of course, speculating how to get there.